Good morning and welcome back to Fintech Week Tel Aviv, our second day. We had a very sporadic day yesterday, and we have a great day today. So check out the schedule. To kick us off today, we have a great session on privacy. When do fintechs build it into their offerings? How to ensure the right balance, data privacy, security, and innovation. It gives me great pleasure to invite Rosenberg to the stage, who's moderating this panel. So please join us, and if you do have any questions, please start typing them in to the box on the right-hand side. So without further ado, thank you very much, Ella. Take it away.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone from Dubai. It's a delight to moderate this panel. This is my second panel that I'm hosting on Fintech Week Tel Aviv. My first one was two years ago, so this essentially feels like a homecoming. I'm delighted to introduce you to Ilana Krancenblum from Sqope, who is the CEO, and also to Martynas, who is the CEO of Privacy Partners in Lithuania. And today we're going to discuss a very interesting topic, which is privacy rights within anti-money laundering and fintech in the fintech sphere. Just before we start, I think it would be wise if each participant introduces himself a bit, and then we can go deep into the questions. So Ilana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ella. Delighted to be here as well, sitting from our offices here in Tel Aviv. So a little bit about myself. As Ella said, my name is Ilana Krancenblum. I'm the CEO of Sqope. We're a provider of enhanced due diligence services and ESG reputational assessments for the financial industry, and we work very much so with the fintech sphere. We are a Luxembourg-based company with offices in various locations, Israel being one of them with our intelligence division. I don't have to explain why our intelligence division is based here in Israel. We have the brightest minds in the world here, and we're able to work with incredible people. The company has been going on for the past 10 years, and I've been part of it for the past 8. So was really able to see, the AML industry grow, and I'm very happy to be here today to talk about privacy and AML and tell you a little bit more about that.
Amazing, thank you. And also I'd like to introduce you to Martynas, who is a counsel who is sitting in Bieliunas in Lithuania. He is the CEO of Privacy Partners. Martynas, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, my pleasure and honor to be in this panel today. So very shortly about Privacy Partners. We are based in Lithuania, providing data protection officer services, introducing innovative privacy enhancement programs, privacy management programs. And since we are working with a very different kind of customers, from data-hungry startups and fintechs to the usual holdings, it's very interesting to see how perception of privacy differs from business to business, and how it can be applied innovatively, not to hinder a business, but enhance the business. And since it's a quite new sphere of activities, I would say that let's say currently this area of business is booming. Information security is another field where we are preparing programs, preparing the innovations, working with European Union projects to introduce the new privacy and security tools. So that's very briefly about us, and currently from a customer's perspective, we are doing most of the European Union customers, some US customers where perception of privacy differs a lot, some of customers from Asian geographies, but mainly our business are doing the European Union. Thanks.
Okay, amazing. And I think a third speaker just joined us. Uri, good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the technical issues.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm good.
Amazing. We were just introducing one another, and I think you just came into the point where Martynas finished his introduction. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'll be happy to. So hello, everyone. My name is Arad. I'm one of the co-founders of Identiq. We're developing a unique solution for identity validation while maintaining privacy. At Identiq, I'm heading the product function and have many years of experience in the risk and technology space.
Great, that's a delight to hear. I'll introduce myself as well. My name is Rosenberg. I'm co-founder at Armada. At Armada, we essentially provide banking solutions for the defense industry and compliance and anti-money laundering solutions for banks, CMIs, and other fintech institutions and financial institutions as well. So without further ado, I think it would be wise if we just kickstart our panel. The first question that I have is for Ilana. Ilana, due to your vast experience specifically within enhanced due diligence, one of the questions I would like to ask you is whether there's a specific conflict when discussing privacy rights and anti-money laundering practices, and where, if there is a conflict, where it does come into being.
Thanks a lot, Ella, for the very relevant question, which is definitely a hot topic within the AML sphere. So to be very straightforward, yes, there's a conflict between GDPR and AML. There's different levels to the conflict. I'm going to try to explain that, in a concise way, because there's very different ways to approach this. So basically, I mean, first of all, GDPR requires you to protect data, whereas AML, anti-money laundering, and more specifically with the 5th AMLD, requires you to share data in order to be compliant. So, the conflict exists on a philosophical level to begin with. But not only that, also in legal requirements set out by the different laws that, financial professionals need to follow. So sometimes there are seemingly conflicting requirements within a regulation itself, and that's truly a conflict when you want to do business in a compliant manner. So as long as financial professionals and very relevant for the audience today, for fintechs, can only analyze their own data, the person in charge of conducting AML checks isn't able to fully understand the risk of a potential client. So to illustrate this and to give you an example, AML procedures may violate the spirit of GDPR, given that GDPR bans data sharing with third countries. However, AMLDs requires institutions to share customer data with foreign regulatory bodies. So once again, you have the conflict at that level too. Another example of the conflict is that GDPR grants EU citizens the right to have their data erased from the data processor system forever, even if the data was legally collected. That's regardless of how it was collected. But at the same time, the AML regulations require that when you investigate suspicious activity, you must save and keep the data and transactions for 5 years minimum. So this is something that happened in May 2020. The European Commission released an action plan for a comprehensive policy on money laundering and terror finance prevention. But then just 2 months later, the European Data Protection Supervisors, EPDS, wrote a press release cautioning that the European Commission needs to make data protection a gold standard in the context of anti-money laundering and combating financing terrorism. So it's really, both sides kind of getting back to each other and saying, no, this is what's most important. No, this is what's most important. So it's truly conflicting, I think, for financial professionals. However, despite everything I've just mentioned, there is peace between the two sides. And I think it's important to note that, the conflicting sides recognize the need of the other and offer room for compliance professionals to navigate. So for instance, while GDPR bans data sharing with third countries, as I was mentioning, it still allows for these transfers for important reasons of public interest. And these important reasons of public interest are not being clearly defined. However, and this is something we've seen in practice, it's become acceptable to do so when it comes to AML. In addition to that, GDPR clarifies that all legal requirements to save data, such as the requirement from AML regulation, supersedes the right to erasure. Yeah. So to conclude, I would say that data privacy and anti-money laundering don't have to be incompatible. There's definitely a conflict. However, there's an effort from both sides and the regulators to work hand in hand.
Yes, that's very, very true. And what you do see essentially from regulators is that many financial institutions working in fintech for some reason think that the regulator is the enemy. I'm not under that impression, and I do believe that the regulator is a friend. You need to maintain a friendly relationship with him. The regulator wants to maintain some sort of level playing field so everyone can join the game. That's the point of a regulator. On that specific point, I do have a question for Martynas, if I may. And my question specifically for you is regarding comment. I actually want you to comment on a specific point that we had in mind, which is whether privacy as a trust driver in the fintech sphere, how does it come into being? Because there are many discussions currently on how privacy can enable some sort of trust within the fintech sphere. And as you're one of the leading lawyers in this field in Lithuania, I was wondering if you could please comment on that.
Thanks for a great question. One correction, I'm not a lawyer. In my backbone, I'm a technologist. So okay. I'm always looking from a innovative perspective to, align technology with law. But let's start from a little bit broader perspective about privacy. So privacy have one very, very interesting point, that privacy is very, very subjective. So imagine, compare the privacy expectation of politician and programmers and fintech. It will be completely different world. And the hard task for all the startups, all the fintechs, which produce innovative services, is to align with all those expectations. And those expectations are very different, very hard to formulate. For many people, it's very vague. They are very different in different countries. For example, if you take GDPR and US CCPA, it's a little bit more concrete than GDPR. So it's pretty tricky. It's a global privacy wars, as I would call. If you take, let's say, the Eastern geographies, they have their own privacy understanding and expectations. If you take Europe, completely different story. So let's say that the playground is pretty vague, pretty unstructured, and it's tough to put into the services. It's tough to put into the systems. But the fintechs have a unique position from that perspective, because fintechs, they attract the customers, they help to formalize the relation between customer and fintech. There are very clear set legal expectations, because most of customers, when they start to use some financial service, they already, understand what will be their privacy, giveaways, what information they need to give out to fintechs, to the regulatory authorities, and they are more or less with that, because they see the very clear value with fintech services which they get. So let's say it's very balanced relation, give and get. So the good thing is that fintechs can introduce the customers into the bit vague field of privacy. Fintechs can introduce their customers into a very new topic of decentralized identity, because currently decentralized identity, it scares the normal people. They don't understand what's that. There is no some central authority in their country, so to say. It's a bit, let's say, it's important topic, but not very well understood. And fintechs, when they introduce the strict privacy, compliance into their systems, into their services, they can help the customers to generate the trust. They can enhance their services. And as a byproduct, they can even start to provide completely new services, as, for example, a privacy guardian for the fintech customer, and in such a way to introduce customers, institutional and normal persons, into the privacy world, into the better privacy world, better, well-balanced privacy, where you know what you get and what you give. So that would be a bit philosophical introduction into the global privacy world, and how a fintechs can get an additional advantage, additional service offerings from.
Amazing, great. Thank you so much for that. Uri, I have a question for you, if I may. Fantastic. So specifically, when I was preparing for this panel, I was actually thinking on how privacy can serve as a block, in certain ways within fintech. I was wondering if you can please comment on whether can privacy is either a blocker of the industry or an enabler of the industry?
That's a very good question, and I think that it also relates, and I have, I think, many parallels also to the situation that Ilana was mentioning earlier about the AML world, because at the end of the day, in both AML, anti-money laundering, terrorist funding, or fraud prevention, there seems to be an inherent conflict where the privacy regulation would require or would expect any fintech or even e-commerce or any other business operating in this space to maintain and protect the privacy. At the same time, requires that you manage fraud, and exactly in the same way that Ilana mentioned, how bad actors may use or try to leverage the right to be forgotten in order to allow themselves to not be detected or not be recorded. We see the same thing happening within the fraud industry. Now, the regulator, anticipating that kind of situation, has created some legitimate interests within the scope of GDPR and other privacy regulation that allows specific and limited sharing of private data and also maintaining of private data in order to allow this kind of activities. The problem is that there's always a balancing act, or at least seemingly a balancing act, between what you share and your ability to fight and prevent fraud. What we have found, and this is one of the things that is unique about Identiq and other companies who are looking for advanced technologies, is the introduction of privacy-enhancing technologies. In general, just privacy-enhancing technologies is a family of technologies that are unique in the fact that they are allowing you to achieve or perform some operations using the data while maintaining the full privacy and secrecy of the data itself. Now, all of that sounds like magic, to be honest. And to be honest, when we're talking to our partners, there's always like a sense of disbelief, because it sounds like, oh my God, that's the best of both worlds, right? We can protect the privacy while maintaining and being able to achieve all the business objectives that we have. But this is where we're fortunate to have smart people in the domain of cryptography and specifically in the branch of secure multi-party computation. I think some of the people have heard of technologies like multi-party computation or homomorphic encryptions and other similar technologies. And what this family of technology allows you to do is really achieve this thing that sounds impossible. Now, yeah, sorry. Did you want to ask something else? I think what is amazing about the introduction of those technologies, and with what the anticipated adoption of those technologies, is that it creates two things at the same time. On one hand, it can allow us to have stronger privacy by actually eliminating the need to create those loopholes in the privacy regulations, which, to be honest, sometimes are being taken advantage of by commercial companies to collect data, not for the purpose that it was supposed to, although they're not allowed to do it, but we're seeing that happening again and again. And also at the greater perspective, the collection of the data just creates more opportunity for data breaches and data leaks, because the more copies of data that we have, the greater the exposure is and the greater the attack surface for fraudsters and hackers become. So on one hand, we may have the opportunity to even reduce the number of copies and the distribution of data in reality, of the raw data, of the private data, while actually enhancing and building and creating much greater utility out of the data. So whether we're going to take an AML type of solution or a fraud prevention type of solution, with the technologies, privacy enhancing technologies like Identiq brings, we can actually start seeing applications where we can validate, verify, and derive value out of the data of even very, very sensitive data that no one would dream of sharing, even if regulation allowed them to do that. So this is what we're seeing, the trend and the opportunity, and new companies coming in this space is actually with the use of things like privacy enhancing technology, multi-party computation, zero knowledge proofs, etc. We're seeing actually the ability to get more value more business benefits while at the same time protecting the data.
Okay, that's a very specific comment. So thank you so much for that. And that it actually leads me to my second question to Ilana, that I would like to raise in regards to anti-money laundering, because as you specifically know, when it comes to anti-money laundering, there's a due diligence that has to be conducted, and several situations there's a need for enhanced due diligence. But not just enhanced due diligence, in certain even advanced cases, you need to even do a reputational due diligence in those specific areas. And specifically for Ilana, I was wondering, it's a more of a practical question, less a philosophical question. If you could please comment on how enhanced due diligence, as a specific service, how can you conduct that while still remaining GDPR compliant?
Sure, Ella. Thanks a lot. So, I mean, I'll try to answer the question really through Sqope and how we conduct actually enhanced diligence, because this is our core business and this is what we do for our clients. So, I mean, without a doubt, GDPR limits the type of information that you can find about an individual or a company today. Of course, with the right of erasure, there's a lot of information that we simply don't find today. You are restricted in the way you can collect the information. GDPR or other privacy protection regulation will limit the amount of information that you can find in a legal manner, and also that you can use. Because what happens is that information will then need to be shared, let's say, between different compliance departments. So that's definitely an issue. That said, I mean, there's still a lot you can do with the open source information there's out there. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. So, I mean, the first thing when you conduct enhanced due diligence is really understanding where to look, how to look, and then once you gather the information, how you analyze the information. So in the case of, enhanced due diligence, our clients typically at Sqope are interested, in either reputational risks pertaining to a subject or, political exposure, criminal backgrounds, legal issues, source of wealth, anything that has to do with, AML regulation, and that would enable them to comply with those regulations. So the first thing that we do at Sqope is that, as a fintech ourselves, we've created a collaborative IT tool which harbors thousands of relevant sources for, hundreds of countries and specific sectors. So when we begin an investigation, our analysts can check the relevant sources. So to give you an example, let's say, that a fintech reaches out to us and is interested in in partnering up with a business, and they want to check, of course, the company, the leadership team, and the UBO of that company. The UBO is based in Kazakhstan. They have no expertise in finding, information in Kazakhstan and making sure that the information they retrieve is legal. So they come to us and we can access, first of all, our collaborative IT tool, which would list all of the relevant sources, which we vetted along the years and we continue doing on an ongoing basis. So for the most part, and that's the beauty of open source, is that these sources are a combination of news sources, corporate legal registries, social media. It could also be, leaks that have been exposed, which at the end of the day is open source information and is fully legal to use. There's also, commercial databases that cover, individuals or companies. So then we look at all of those, different sources that I was just mentioning, and there's two case scenarios. Either you have somebody who's very low profile and is not on social media, doesn't seem to appear anywhere. So I think, what could be relevant for the audience here today is really understand, and this is the same way that our analysts would think, okay, I have the good sources, I know where to check, but nothing actually appears there. What does it mean for, for my AML risk linked to that particular person or company, right? So I think you really need to have this, outside of the box thinking and think, okay, this person doesn't appear anywhere. Could that be a first red flag? First of all, that could be the point, because if you're looking at partnering up with the company that, you know, seems to be very prominent. They have an amazing website, but then the owner of that company doesn't seem to appear anywhere. I mean, you know, it makes you think, does it make sense? So things you could do is simply, you know, start looking for his entourage, business partners, family members, anybody that, you know, might be active on social media or sharing information about the subject. We see this very often, and you're able to connect the dots to some extent for that. You have another case scenario where when you're dealing with, you know, high profile subjects, I mean, the challenge is much different, because instead of being on the hunt for information, you're actually working through, you know, to filter thousands and thousands of sources and, you know, thinking to yourself, how is this relevant for my case? And, you know, there's very often cases where you see negative media exposure about a person. There could be a smear campaign about a subject. So once again, I think, you know, the main question that anybody needs to ask themselves when they're dealing with this is, does it make sense? Who's behind the source? If you're reading about, you know, let's say in an open source, again, let's say an article, who wrote the article, when, why? And these are all questions that you can ask yourselves that, you know, enable you to build a really nice profile and that are fully GDPR compliant. Exactly. Because it's really, you know, looking at the amount of information that's out there that's open source, which, by the way, is something that we do provide in our reports. We list all of the sources, you know, that we use in our reports, which enable then our clients to check them. If there's also an audit from the regulator, they can also prove how the information was obtained, which is, of course, always legal. But, you know, to answer your question, I think it's really a question of thinking once again outside of the box, trying to find as much information as you can, and then understanding what does the information mean for my case and in terms of AML. Is there a risk? If there's a risk, then what is the risk? Somebody who's politically exposed doesn't necessarily mean is high risk, because it depends on what jurisdiction and what's the political exposure. So I hope that, you know, that answers the question, but I think there's basically a lot that can be done, you know, without violating data protection laws to still conduct enhanced due diligence today. That's the beauty of, you know, of internet. And as long as you're able to really trace the source and, you know, once again, understand who's behind it, it's definitely possible.
That's actually very insightful, Ilana. Thank you so much for that. I was actually educated, so yes, thank you so much for that. Martynas, I have a question for you. It's also a comment. It's less of a question, it's more of a comment that I would like you specific to comment on. It's the mere point of embedded privacy. So I was wondering if you could please, first of all, explain what embedded privacy is and how it influences the fintech sphere in this day and age.
Great topic, and I think Uri made some insights into the topic in his speech. But let me start again from a very, very broad topic to explain all the ecosystem here. So imagine the situation. There are a lot of different privacy regulations in the world. Currently, it's approximately 270 laws across all the countries. It's immense number. It's not only GDPR, CCPA, Canadian PIPEDA, or Russian or Chinese legislation on privacy. So it's a lot of regulations. Most of the countries, they say that data residency is a must, that you should keep your data in European Union, in US, in Russia, or another country. And there are lots and lots of such, hurdles and obstacles, which are, presented for fintechs and other startups. Another issue is that most of fintechs, they collect so much data about their customers that they know more about customer than customer itself. And this creates some kind of perceived threat for most of natural persons, because if someone knows about me more than I myself know, it's a threat. It's a risky issue. So in that let's say in that situation, we do see that fintechs do need a super robust IT security implementation and super robust privacy implementations. And unfortunately, to say, in many cases, as we work with many fintechs, we do see that these things are completely forgotten. I do completely understand. We are ourselves a young company. But in the beginning, most of fintechs, most of startups, they orient to core business. They, so to say, leave security and privacy until better times. And when they grow very fast and they meet the problem that, okay, now we have, let's say, user base of 100,000 customers and no privacy at all implemented. When we look into the technical implementation, in most cases, it's a huge database. It's one database, let's say, no encryption, no pseudonymization, which are explicitly mentioned in GDPR, in other privacy legislations across the world. And such simple technical solutions were not implemented in many cases. Yes, I do understand the situation. As I said, the core business is the first priority. The problem is that because of such non-compliance of simple technical requirements, the startups and fintechs, they can have huge problems in the future. So our direction here is very simple. Privacy should be embedded in the solution. There is even the notion of privacy by design, which is mentioned in GDPR, TCPA, and in PIPAD, wherever you look. The legislators and regulators, they say that privacy must be embedded in the design. Encryption and pseudonymization are two big things which need to be taken care of. You cannot run one database. As Uri mentioned, there is a secure multi-party computing or blockchain, to speak simple. There are technologies already on board which should be deployed to increase the privacy and security. And only with those technologies, you can have a viable financial solution, viable technology implementation. If you don't have these things, it's very tricky. To add up, let's say, customer expectation that their information should be very secure, to add up artificial intelligence, which can draw a lot of analytic conclusions from a customer's financial data, it creates a, so to say, let's say, explosive situation. Most of startups, we have a huge amount of data. We have huge identification possibilities. We have deep insights through the EML and KYC, know your customer processes. But this information currently, in most cases, it's not adequately protected. So let's say privacy should be really embedded. Privacy by design should be, how to say, one of the first questions when you start to think about architecture of your fintech solution. So very, very brief introduction. And I think it's currently a problem. It has a lot of ways how it can be resolved, but the attention to this problem, it's definitely not at the level which we would expect.
Quite interesting and also very, very insightful. I have one last question for Uri, and I think we'll open the floor then for a Q&A. So I would like to finish this part of the panel of the specific questions in regards to how we view fintech, in the future. And I was wondering, Uri, if you could please comment on how privacy can affect the fintech sphere within the next 1 or 2 years, taking into consideration 6AMLD and the new innovations to GDPR.
Yeah. So I think that we're going to see several revolutions because if you think about it, if we look at where privacy regulation is heading, both from the requirement by consumers and data subjects to have a higher degree of control over the data, I think the increased number of data breaches that we're seeing, and also I think, as Martynas just mentioned, also the requirements for data to be only stored within the region that it's been collected in order to be properly controlled. All of those things are actually acting in direct contradiction to what the fraud management industry have been doing for the past 20 or 30 years, which has been just building larger and larger databases of aggregating information in a very centralized location. And, we've seen this kind of approaches ever since the first credit bureaus. So if you think about all the credit bureaus are basically centralized data sharing organizations that are regulated, of course, but the same model have been taken to many areas in fraud management, in fintech, and in commerce in general. And we've seen the result of the creation of many large companies. On top of that, we're seeing in the last years large consolidation trend. So not only that we have multiple companies in the market, we're seeing large companies buying them and consolidating. So we're getting an even larger databases. And I think that what Martynas mentioned again about the consumers' concern about how much is gathered and collected about them, we're going to see that coming to a conflict, to a very significant conflict that, I don't believe that with the education on one hand on what could be derived out of the data, and second, I think the regulators getting to be better educated about what are some of the alternatives that could be used. I think we're going to see some very, very significant changes in the way that everything that has to do on data validation, identity validation, financial instrument validations, and the ability to manage those things through risk-based approaches without sharing data, I think is going to be what we're going to see in the coming years. I think that the other technology, of course, is with the maturation of distributed solutions, and we're going to see more solutions that are about distributed solution, about collaboration, and privacy protection all coming at the same time. So I think these are going to be really exciting years. Yeah. We're seeing also where technology is heading, and I think that with many changes, I think it might be a little bit scary at the beginning because some companies might feel that they are going to be denied with the very basic tools that they need in order to conduct a business safely. But what we're seeing from looking at this market is that actually not only that companies will be able to maintain and be able to achieve the same degree of service that they have today, but there's actually the potential to also create a much better user experience with lower friction and a much higher degree of security, privacy, and risk management at the same time.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Nuri. I think it sums up our panel in a very optimistic way as well. I think we should open the floor for Q&A. I see we have a few. We just have a quick look. I see that a few people have been chatting, which is fantastic, but I was wondering if any of the participants within this panel would like to ask a few questions. We can open the floor for that. Okay, I don't see any questions. Hold on one second. No, I don't. So without further ado, I would like to thank the participants, Ilana, Martynas, and Uri, for this remarkable panel. Hopefully next year in Fintech Week Tel Aviv, it will be an in-person conference, so we can all meet and see each other in person. Till then, I wish all of you a very good morning from Dubai. And yeah, let's see where the future heads. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.